Joseph Talbot, what's the difference between a government and a protection racket? Very simple. The government has the force of law behind it. That's it. What makes... it's not a question of value. I've got my $1 trillion bill buried here somewhere from real currency from the Bank of Zimbabwe. And I'm not an expert in this, but one way to look at it is to look at money and to understand, which I dimly understand, the concept of legal tender. Money, let's just say money as a medium of exchange. I'm not talking about the U.S. dollar. I'm talking about money as a medium of exchange. You can pay for things any number of ways. Bitcoin, transfer funds and all the rest of it, work it off, whatever. But legal tender means that you are required to accept this money if it is presented to you. That's my understanding of legal tender. It means that if somebody presents me with a dollar bill to pay for something, I have to accept it. I have the choice of accepting something else, but I have to accept that. That's why it's legal tender. And so the money system, the U.S. dollar money system, has got an insane advantage built into it because it is required. You're required by law to accept it, no matter how worthless it becomes through debt or inflation or whatever the case may be. You have to take it. And I say get rid of the legal tender requirement and then just pay people in whatever form they find best for them in terms of getting paid. Roy Hamill says there's an example, a couple of videos on YouTube of people trying to pay their mortgage with cash and the bank's not accepting it. Yeah. I didn't know this until a friend of mine, Jeremy Boyd, talked to me about it. He bought a house and he basically said, and I still don't understand this very, very clearly, but basically he said that this house, and just for the sake of it, so we don't embarrass anybody, I don't know what the cost of the house was, but for the sake of it, we'll say it's a $1,000 house. It was more than that. But basically, what he said was, it's not like the bank has $1,000 in the bank vault that they then pay to the guy who owns the house and that they expect me to repay over 30 years. That's not it. When I sign this mortgage, $1,000 is going to be generated out of thin air. $1,000 will appear. It will appear as a $1,000 debit in the bank's records. And I have signed a piece of paper saying that I will reduce that zero to that negative 1,000 to zero plus interest. But the money was invented when the mortgage was signed. I don't know. I have to say this about the money situation. If I woke up tomorrow and I found the entire city burning and people were, roasting rats on spits over burning tires, I would not be the slightest bit surprised at all. Not at all. But at the same time, something's still working. And I suspect it's like, it's going to continue to flail itself along as long as the payments on the debt, not the debt, that's never going to be repaid. That $25 trillion is never, ever, ever, ever going to be repaid. Everybody knows it. So I'm assuming that as long as the payments on the debt continue to be made, people will stick around for the ride. But in any way, I don't know. You start to get into the money situation today and you're dealing not with economics, it's more like metaphysics, really. I'm trying to get through as many of these as we can here. Get through all of them. Might be able to. So let me move faster here. Yeah, it's still going to be a reach. Eric Blake. Hey, Bill, I've been thinking. Where do you see Attorney General Barr's investigation into the corrupt practices of the deep state ultimately leading? Any big-time convictions? And if so, who? Will Hillary at least get everything she deserves? ? Well, Eric, that's a great question. And the only thing I have to say, unfortunately, is that I feel like I've spent the last hour and 40, certainly the last hour answering it. I don't know if there's anything I can add to it. If I'd had it at the top of the list, I would have launched as a sort of thing. But in any event, it's a great question. It's just that's exactly it. we've been talking about what is going to happen or what might happen, and we'll see. I hope that I'm just not gonna get my hopes up on this one. I'm really not. This is one where it's like the stakes are so high that I'm just gonna wait and see if I might be very pleasantly surprised in any fraction of the rule of law being restored is better than nothing. So we'll see about that. David Crahan again. Do government unions give privileges to federal and state employees, e.g. police officers, that can make them above the law? I don't know. So we're talking about public sector unions. I don't know if it makes them above the law, David, but it does give them the power to be paid whatever they want. The problem with these kind of public sector unions is you've got two people negotiating on the same side of the table. Nobody's representing the owner. So basically, what happens is if you have public sector unions and they have the money base from dues and the political base in terms of activating their voters. Take LAUSD, for example, perfect example. I think it was the number one donation to the DNC was from LA Unified School District. So that's a great example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Now, if you have a car company like Chevy, let's say, and you've got the people who are building the cars are unionized, and Chevy is paying a certain amount of money per hour for people who are building the cars. The union guys can say that's not enough money. And then the company's guys can say, well, it is, and then you can start getting down to the weeds of it, and you're going to find your answer by looking at the actual books. In other words, if a look at the books shows that sales are up and that company profits are high means like 3%, 4%, executives are taking home a big bundle, which they're entitled to do. If you see all of these things, then the government, then the union, private union workers can say, hey, look, man, you're pulling our chain here. We know that there's money coming in here, so we're going to demand this much of a raise, or else we'll go on strike. And there you go. Conversely, and this is the main point, this is the critical point. If you have workers who are building cars, and they come in and demand money, and it is more money than the company can pay, then the company goes out of business. And that stops. And the threat of the company going out of business is obvious to even the union people. They can realize, okay, if we do this, here's their revenues, here's what we want, and if we get it, they will in fact go out of business. And then the unions will back down, and you'll reach some kind of equilibrium where everybody's getting what they think is best for themselves. Now, contrast that with a public sector union like the teachers union in LA. How do they get paid? Well, they get paid by government expenditures. Legislation is passed legislation is passed that allocates funds for those teachers. But they're not negotiating against a person who's trying to keep the money in the bank. They are in the same side. They're joined at the hip to the politicians. So the reason that you get into so much trouble with public sector unions is the unions say, well, I think teachers should get paid $200,000 a year. And rather than somebody saying, well, that's just too much money, the politicians say, well, that's a lot of money. If you get us elected, then we'll pay you $200,000 a year. So now the union mobilizes all of its people, all of its ground resources, all the rest of it. It elects politicians who agree to this. The money comes out of the pockets of people like me who are trying to make a living here and keep lights on. And then and it's also added to the tab, just to the debt. So there's nobody arguing on the other side of the table. And that's why I think they should be illegal. Roosevelt thought they should be illegal. Did I say, Cheryl said I said federal funds. I didn't mean to say federal, I meant state, obviously. But you get the idea. There's nobody, they can demand whatever they want to from the politicians. And the politicians have no reason to not pay it. The politicians have every reason to give them exactly what they want. Because the politicians, unlike the management versus the workers in a private sector thing, in the public sector, it's not the workers versus the politicians. It's the workers and the politicians versus the taxpayers, and we see the result of this. Let's see, Dave. I'm going to skip your question because it's a very in-depth question. It's not really exactly what we want, and to be honest with you, it would take another hour to deal with that one, and I just don't want to do it. Is that Sayedi? Can we start with investigating politicians who have never worked outside of government becoming multimillionaires on a salary of $174,000 a year? I think that would be an excellent place to start. I think that would be a very, very good place to start. You get paid $120,000 a year. You've been in public service for 10 years, and your net worth is $50 million. Now, your net worth should be $1.2 million, assuming you didn't spend a dime. Yeah, we're kind of curious where all this money came from. And then, see, one of the many, many beautiful things about a flat tax is even if the money comes to them illicitly, they still have to pay tax on what they buy. So if their entire plan is to hide all of this money and taking all this money under the table, it's a crime and they should pay for the crime. But from a citizen point of view, it's like, well, so they stole $20 million and now they bought a $20 million house. They're taxed on that as a percentage of income like all the rest of us with a flat tax. And therefore the money goes, into the system. And we're not stuck with people paying for things and other people getting away with it. That's the nice thing about taxing buying. When you tax things that are for sale, nobody gets away. Drug dealers need to buy cars, and so does everybody. So it doesn't matter where the money comes from. It only matters where it gets spent. Let's see. Tafan, Merlin, Wonderboy. We got 4 or 5 more. I'm going to get through these things, go home. Nicely played. When the Empire strikes back and Trump's team finishes their investigations into the various deep state criminals, can Obama's arresting agent please be dressed like the man in the yellow hat? I have to say that every now and then I simply do not get a reference. So I am going to Google man in the yellow hat. But I will do it on this tab because I want to lose Facebook. Man in the hat. Is this got anything to do with Ted Shackelford? Okay, George and the Man in the Yellow Hat. Got it. Yes, I'm looking at him now. He bears kind of a strange resemblance to Woody from Toy Story. Sure. I have to tell you, I don't have a single point of contact with this entire idea, but he's a wholesome-looking chap, and he certainly is flamboyantly dressed, and the more flamboyantly dressed he is, the better I would like it when they take Hillary down to the tank. So that was fun.